Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Through Thick and Thin with me, Rachael, the therapist. And today I am bringing on my good friend, Alyssa Fountain. She is the owner of Saltwater CrossFit Gym in Summers Point, and I'm really happy to have her come on today.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi.
So, Alyssa and I have been friends for several years now,
A minute.
and
It's been a minute.
it has been a little while, and our relationship, I have changed a lot throughout our relationship. Alyssa has changed a lot throughout our relationship. So we have had previous conversations about food and our body and our relationship with movement. So I thought she'd be a great person to bring on.
Thanks, Rach. Yeah, I'm excited. I think we met at CrossFit, but you were still an undergrad, and I was definitely not the owner of a gym or particularly good at CrossFit.
Yes, I was definitely in the midst of trying to figure out my relationship with food and exercise. So it is interesting to see how things have transitioned over the years. Just so whoever's listening or watching knows, what is your history with disordered eating or, an unhealthy relationship with movement?
So thanks for asking me that, because I think sometimes I think of my relationship with food and my body, and you and I have talked for quite some time. I'd say like a year and a half now, where I have had an understanding that much of it is disordered, but not always a great way. I've struggled with how to find words to talk about that. So for me, I have had body dysmorphia for a long time, and you and I have some running jokes about this. And, I often think about, just for a little bit of context, I'm not an athlete. Prior to doing CrossFit, I was sort of like the kid who was really fast, and you could put me on a soccer team, but you didn't really want me to get the ball because it wouldn't go anywhere helpful. But I could get to the ball. Or like the kid that was kind of picked not quite last for kickball because you knew I was uncoordinated, but still really wanted to be a part of the team. So
Oh,
for a long time, I think my relationship with movement was that when I was doing something physical, I was incredibly self-conscious, because there was a sense of awareness about that I wasn't super coordinated. I was just sort of participating. And that made me super self-conscious when it came to trying anything fitness related. So what happened for me was that, I was really uncomfortable in my own skin. I wound up getting sober really young. I was in a relationship with someone who's now my husband, who was really into his hobbies, and his hobbies were very physical. At the time that we met, he was an avid kite surfer and ran a kite surfing school. And I really didn't have anything that wasn't related to recovery that I could identify as a hobby. So I started running. And when I started running, I look back at this time when I was running, where I would, if someone gave me a compliment about my body, which was typically that I was very thin, and sometimes in hindsight, I realized that people were actually expressing concern about my weight. And I couldn't hear, I would hear it as a compliment and then tell you why I shouldn't accept your compliment, which is even a bit crazier. But I look back at that time in my life, and I was really rail thin and would constantly see myself and think about where I needed to lose weight, to the point that you could tell me I looked beautiful and I'd be like, you should look at my cankle. Have you noticed I have a cankle? And it's like, no, nobody knows about your cankle, Alyssa. So I found CrossFit because I was looking for, I honestly kind of hated running, and I was hoping that I could maybe build some muscle and change my physique a little bit. When I found CrossFit, it really healed my relationship with my body in a lot of ways, because I became very empowered by what my body is capable of, and started to see that my body served as more than just something to look at and something to criticize. But on the flip side, CrossFit also made me very fixated on what not CrossFit, Alyssa doing CrossFit, made me very fixated on what I put into my body, and is this good for me, and is it bad for me, and is it killing me, which is in some ways really hysterical that, a former drug addict is now obsessing over canola oil and that being the thing that's going to shave 15 years off the end of my life. So I would say where you and I stand now is that I've started to really explore a lot of my restrictive eating and my fear of food. And in the process, some of my body dysmorphia has healed over the years. And in other areas, it's kind of reared its head in a different way. That was a very long answer to a short question.
No, I think that gave a lot of insight, but I do think it's important to just as like a caveat, and I think, we will talk about movement and things like that with CrossFit. I really appreciate how you were like, Alyssa doing CrossFit, because I had a similar experience where I think CrossFit is great and it's a great community and it really focuses on strength-based movements and, becoming a stronger, faster, more agile athlete. And there's no mirrors. It's not really like as like aesthetically physique based. But I mean, a gym atmosphere is a gym atmosphere, so like there will sometimes be people who come in and talk about diets, but like you can't control that. That's something like I had to just kind of like stay in my own lane. And also like as a competitive athlete growing up, CrossFit was really triggering for my self-worth and self-esteem when I wasn't the best at everything. And I would personalize that to being because Rachael is fat is why, and it's like so irrational looking back on it, but it felt so personal. And this thing that is supposed to be fun, right? Like I am nowhere near, or I was nowhere ever near being a games athlete, right? Like this was something that was meant to be fun and to keep me like physically in shape and also help like my physical strength and my mental health. And then I just spiraled with it. So it's like, your own personal experience. I think people look at CrossFit and they're like, they're so intense or da da da. And it's like, that's a you thing. It's really like what you make of it.
Right. And for me, what I found with CrossFit was that I was so insecure about looking dumb doing anything that I would rather do nothing at all. And that's sort of historically been my mentality, which is, I am well aware that that's not a great mentality to have, but I've been like that since I was a little kid, that I'm so afraid of what other people think about me because you might think I'm as dumb as I think I am. So a lot of, as an adult, trying new things for me has just been like, if I don't try this, I won't know. And when I went to CrossFit for the first time, I walked into a class and someone introduced themselves to me because they knew that I was new. And I was so insecure in that moment. And I felt so much relief just having someone say, I notice you're new here. Welcome. This is what we do. Someone even said to me, if you, and I say this to other people now, if you feel like a spaz, that's kind of normal. Like we're about to do some Olympic lifts that people train for years and years and years to do. Just one movement. And we're about to maybe integrate 3 or 4 or 5 of them into a 60-minute class. So if you feel spastic, it's okay. Just try it and come back tomorrow and it's going to be a completely different workout. So I really try to carry that into the gym when I see other new people walk in because I know that I can be so consumed with self. And you and I have talked a lot about, trying not to comment on people's weight loss because I never know if someone is totally overtraining and under eating, but I do try to comment on goals that they're hitting in the gym because I know how much work it takes to sometimes show up when you just don't want to. Not because physically you're tired, but because mentally it's like a huge burden to just walk in the door.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing like I love specifically about Saltwater, that everybody is so inviting and I truly feel like everybody's really welcoming and a lot of the people there are in recovery and they're working on themselves like physically, mentally, spiritually. I don't know. I just feel like it's a really great environment to go and just like be a part of.
Thank you. And I want to just add this because one of the reasons that we actually opened this gym to the public, I wasn't necessarily going to talk about Surfside, but because I work for this program, Surfside, which is an adventure-based extended care for men in early recovery from substance use disorder or addiction. Addiction is kind of like the catch-all term. But when we initially opened the gym, it was because in COVID, where they were working out was closed down, and this was an opportunity for the guys in our program that is adventure-based, that caters to people who maybe don't learn in a typical environment. We opened this for them. But in the process, we started to have these conversations about how the one thing that people in recovery from substance use have, that people in recovery from trauma, eating disorders, postpartum depression, kind of literally everything in the world that can rock your life. The one thing that people in recovery have is fellowship through, 12-step programs or some of the alternatives, even if someone's not in a 12-step fellowship. And then folks with eating disorders, kind of, unless you're in some sort of therapeutic group setting, it's really challenging to find that community sometimes. So the hope was that we could build a space where people could find fellowship, because we know how healing community can be, and really be welcoming to all those things.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's one of the things I tell my clients, who are isolating, who are really like stuck in their own head or just avoiding everybody and everything. Community is such a huge thing. And I tell them, like, I don't care where you get your community or how you get your community, but you need like people.
Something.
You need
Yeah.
something. And it's just that, like you said, that first step in the door that could really change perspective and get somebody to keep coming back.
And I even think about like how I have you, and I can tell you a thought that I know is not reasonable, and you're just like, yeah, I understand. I've been through that too. And that's the sort of thing that I think, when I was getting sober, I was so afraid to talk about how I felt internally, because I was so convinced that it might be too crazy for you. And as I started to get vulnerable with other people, that's when I found that if there's a name for it, it's because someone else has fought it or done it before. And I'm not that unique, and I'm not alone in the world.
Yeah. So I do want to like continue to talk about, your recovery from, addiction and how you feel like that has affected your relationship with food in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you and I had a lot of conversations about this, but essentially, I found recovery when I was 18 years old. I was really young. I know that sounds really young to people. That's because it is really young. And in my experience, I had no doubts when I was introduced to recovery that I belonged there. And I wasn't necessarily excited about it, but I was well aware that my substance use and alcoholism had brought me to a point where I could identify with things that happened in the lives of people who drank for 30 years, when realistically I was on that path for like 5 or 6. So I really hit a low bottom quickly. Through that process, what I learned was that my brain does not work like most people's. And when I start using a mind or mood altering substance, I cannot stop, because I feel so anxious, restless, irritable, angry, full of self-loathing, scared, fearful. Like, you name every term for a bad emotion, I feel those things without a substance. So the cycle for me was that when I start, I can't stop. And when I stop, I can't stay stopped, because I feel so bad without something in my system. And for me, as I started to explore this body dysmorphia and really restrictive relationship with food, I found that I had a lot of my mentality around food wrapped up in that same sort of recovery mentality. And what I mean by that is, like, you and I want to backtrack a little bit, which is just that you and I have had a really cool experience together, which is that, Rachael is a clinician. There was a time that she was working in an inpatient substance use facility and found that her clients were kind of being recommended to go to a 12-step fellowship like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. And they would often fail in that realm. I don't know if fail is the right word, but they would struggle and wind up back in treatment. And she was like, what's going on here that people can't grasp the 12 steps? And asked if she could go through them to have an experience, to understand what it was that she was asking her clients to do. So you and I did that together. And in the process, we used some of your relationship with food and your disordered eating, an area of growth. At one point, I was like, maybe you go to Overeaters Anonymous, right? And you went and found that, like, while Overeaters Anonymous is really helpful for some people, for people who think of food the way that you do and the way that I do, that just like fuels the restrictive eating. You know, there was a time when I would say, not that long ago, that I would say, like, maybe I'm addicted to sugar. And so my recovery should be that I don't consume any sugar, anything that's like a sugar, any artificial sweetener under any and all circumstances, because like a drug, if I consume a little bit, I lose control of the amount that I consume, and then it all spirals. And I did that for a time and found that, like, then I just became so afraid of food, and it kind of robbed me of the joy of, I wouldn't even say the joy of eating, but like the joy of being around other people, because as someone who doesn't drink, so much of my life is wrapped up in other ways that we can like be together, which means breaking bread together. And it's weird for people to like come over and eat with me. And I'm like, you guys can eat all that, but sugar's going to kill all of us. Have you heard about seed oils? We're also going to talk about those, but please enjoy, eat, you eat. But while you eat that, I'm just going to tell you this TikTok that I watched, that food is, you know, and when I met with, so I finally like sort of the, where I feel like I really took a turn in my relationship with food. Part of it was that you have been so vocal about your healing process and how not everybody's looks the same. And that was very comforting for me, because as someone who's been listening to you be very vulnerable about your experiences, it's important for me to hear that your experience isn't necessarily going to be the same as mine. And neither is Allie's, who was on your podcast, or Paul's, or Ryan's. But there might be some similarities, just like in recovery, where I learned to identify with your experience and find those shared experiences, but not compare mine to yours. So when I met with a registered dietitian, which is a master's level nutritionist, so she's highly educated. Her name is Carly Lombard. She's in Linwood. When I met with her, I started to learn that like a lot of my restrictive eating actually makes it so that the things that I think I'm healing in my body, which were a lot of like medical issues, I was actually kind of making them worse, or at least stagnant, because I was so like, we really looked at my plate and she was like, it's great that you eat so many leafy greens, but like you also have, this is the explanation to your irritable bowel syndrome. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you've eaten no soluble fiber in a month. It's just insoluble fiber, and you can't figure out why your stomach hurts. Long story short, there's some real value in seeking guidance from someone who really knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's important to like highlight, I kind of I don't want to say poke fun, but, you know, I'll challenge my clients' thoughts, and my clients know that I'm very sarcastic, and it's something that works for us. Where they start playing, you know, like doctor, pharmacist, their own dietitian, nutritionist, therapist, you know, because we have so much access to so much information, which is great in a lot of ways, but also overwhelming. And then it can get to a point where what's true, what's not, because there's these people who aren't master levels clinicians who are giving us nutrition advice, who are really like fitness influencers who get paid to promote these supplements that are kind of bullshit. And, you know, they're grasping for straws. And that was me and my experience, where I just got to a point where, you know, it was during COVID and I was just really seeking control, and that was changing my body. And if I saw someone I liked, I was like, or I wanted to look like aesthetically, physically, I was like, I'm just going to do what they're doing, and not contributing my genetics, age, you know, sleep hygiene, stress, like nothing. I was just like, yep. And then I would punish myself when it didn't get to that point. But anyway, like sidetracking to my clients, they often think like, oh, well, this is healthy. Like I just eat all these fruits and vegetables because that's healthy. And I'm like, well, where did you learn that? And why are we like lacking that education? They're very resistant to like, oh no, I already know what I need to eat. It's like, well, do you? Because you've been having all these issues for so long, it seems like.
And I told you, like, I was floored. I thought that I knew so much about how to eat and why I eat this way and what's good for me and what's bad for me. And in my first meeting with her, we were talking about food pairings, and it was so simple that I was like, I'm sorry, can you just explain that to me again? Which is basically like, if what I would do was like, I would eat an apple as a snack, which is a great snack, but I would eat an apple alone. And then an hour later, I would be really hungry. So I would eat, a piece of chicken that was in my fridge alone. And then an hour later, I'd be really, and what I learned from her was some really basic stuff, like that some of the sats and carbs and proteins, when paired together, create a sense of being satiated. And I'm depriving myself of that when I'm just randomly eating one food group, and I can feel more satiated and I can feel better for whatever activity I have in the future if I'm eating, an apple with a cheese stick, or like these combinations of food together. And it was funny because, when I met with her the first time, she said, "What do you want to work on? We're going to write it out on this board." And she was super visual, which was very helpful to me. And we wrote out, my stomach issues I wanted to work on, my polycystic ovarian syndrome. I wanted to be able to eat in a way that supported that. And I wanted to work on my restrictive eating. And then as we had a conversation about which one we wanted to focus on first, it became very clear to me that if I didn't address my restrictive eating, I wouldn't actually be able to eat in a way that supports like my gut health and my hormonal issues.
Yeah, and I had this conversation a lot with, that was my own experience of the more I restricted, the more food groups I cut out, the more my IBS was flaring up because one, I was now like so stressed around food, and stress is a huge trigger for just like my gut. And two, now when I do eat these things, because I can't avoid everything, but like I want to live my life, I would just be struggling for the next like several days. And it is interesting, and I do think it really is important to meet with a dietitian, nutritionist if you have any type of restrictive behaviors, to meet with somebody who specializes in some type of eating disorder training or disordered eating clinical work, because at the time my stomach was a mess, and this was like probably right after COVID. And I met with a nutritionist, and we went through the whole like IBS diagnosis, FODMAP diet, trying to figure out what my triggers
We
are.
talked about that.
Yeah, which honestly, there were some things like I have a sensitivity to cauliflower. I was eating cauliflower every day because that was like, I was putting cauliflower in my oatmeal, right? Because
better than rice. Yeah.
Yes, it was like that fat. And I was eating it several times a day with everything because I had this idea like 0 calories and it would keep me full and it's a vegetable, and like really it was killing my stomach. So now I don't eat cauliflower really. But anyway, this nutritionist never once asked me if I was restricting or like what my goals were or my history was with that. And she was trying to get me to eat more and go away from that, like also knowing that I was tracking and there was some resistance there. But we never had that conversation of like, I'm probably constipated for several days at a time because I'm not eating enough. Like I'm not eating enough food. There's nothing to digest. And then when I do eat, now I have the opposite problem. And it's like, why was this never discussed with me? Because once I started eating properly, my bowel movements became way more regular. And sorry, TMI for everybody, but if you have IBS, any tummy issues, we talk about bowel movements over here.
I was just thinking to myself, like when I was seeing this nutritionist, I was like, how many times a day do you think she talks about poop?
There's a poop chart. We talked about it. Yes.
I can't stop. Yeah, and the other thing that I realized in working with her, your poop chart reminded me, was that I was doing two things that were really, really like ravaging my body and my mental health. And one was that I would wait until I was really hungry to eat. So I had like no ability to listen to cues from my body. And some of that is me thinking I could eat soon, but I want to get through this thing. I could eat soon, but I want to, so some of that is not as much eating disorder related as it is like not being able to time manage my life.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I noticed was that so many times I would I would wait until I was starving, and then the one thing that I would eat would be something just to tide me over, like a banana or like an apple, which is insoluble fiber. And then
Mm.
it was like coffee and a banana, and then I'd wonder why all of a sudden I was having like a medical emergency.
Um,
Oh,
you're really truly, I feel like, not you don't have, if you don't talk about poop, you don't have tummy issues. I feel like
yeah.
it gets to a point where Ryan and I, when we started dating, it's like we talk about poop here, like girls poop too. Okay. Um,
My husband and I made a friend, my friend Tiffany, who's never pooped her pants. And we've been like, there's no way. Tiffany, there's no way. Tell us the truth. Yes, you have. You've never had to throw out your underwear somewhere. It's like this. And she's like, she'll be like, I've never done that. Can we please talk about something else? And it's like, between Ian and I, we're like, no, Tiffany, we're bringing it up again. At the third dinner in a row, we've got to talk about this.
no, no topics are off limits. I do want to touch on what I thought was interesting before I go to my next question about like the hunger piece, because I talk about this a lot with my clients, especially like teenage clients. And I think it's interesting how they don't have this conversation with their parents. And I believe it's just that parents are also uneducated. And that's why sometimes when I refer out to a dietitian nutritionist, I send the whole family, because I think this is something, usually a 14-year-old isn't cooking and isn't grocery shopping, so the family should be involved. But they really, a lot of people struggle with practical hunger. So there's, like hunger when you're actual hunger or hungry, and then, like emotionally, like you have like this nostalgic or kind of emotional connection to food. And then we talk about practical hunger a lot, which a lot of the kids I work with, they wake up, they're like, I'm not hungry in the morning. I get up, go on the bus, go to school, and then I don't eat until lunchtime, which is anywhere between like 11 or 1 when they wake up at like 5 or 6. And a lot of the times, if they're seeing me, there's some type of disordered relationship with food. So they have like a yogurt for lunch. They finish school, go to sport practices or whatever, and then they don't eat like a full meal until dinner time. And they're wondering why they're so tired and falling asleep in school, and also, kind of cranky all the time. So I talk a lot about practical hunger of like, you need to eat even when you're not hungry. Like this is something that we need to work on, of like packing cereal and just taking it with you, or like for me, when I'm not hungry, something like a smoothie or protein shake, like just kind of is easier for me to get down, so I don't feel like I'm stuffing myself. And it's just like something I like constantly bring up with them. But that practical hunger, like if I'm going to go into 6 sessions, I know I need to eat a meal before I leave, or I'm going to crash halfway through. It's like, I feel like it's just not something a lot of people think about.
And it's crazy because I am I often say I'm like a zoo animal. Like I have to eat on a regular schedule or I become vicious. But what's fascinating is that there are days, and they don't happen often, where I'll get up, I'll get consumed with something, because I try to start working at like 7 a.m. so that people can't interrupt me with some of the more boring administrative stuff. Sometimes I'll get into working and I'll forget to eat, and then it's like 10:30 and I'll be like, oh, I didn't even realize I wasn't hungry. But then by the time it hits 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, I can't even it's not even that I can't be super productive with work. It's that I can be fairly present in a conversation because I'm way more agitated. I'm way more distracted. So I've learned that I just got to eat my pre-breakfast snack, my breakfast, my mid-morning snack, my lunch, my early afternoon. It's like, I now know exactly what I need to perform best mentally.
And I think it's important to just know yourself, because I'm very similar. Like I kind of prefer slow mornings. Like when I wake up, I have my coffee, I'm on my phone, or like I'm catching up on notes or something. And then next thing I know, like I have things to do, and it's 11 o'clock and I haven't eaten anything since I woke up at 7. And then it's like, why am I so hangry right now? So, it's really important for me to like have like quick things to go, like overnight oats or something that I can just like grab and go or have with my coffee in the morning. And like I think it's just knowing that about yourself and having that self-awareness to plan differently, because if not, it's like just going to be this never-changing cycle.
Yeah, completely.
So you did mention earlier, which I do kind of want to shift gears and talk about because I think it would be beneficial for a lot of listeners or viewers. So you mentioned you have a PCOS diagnosis. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about that, like how that diagnosis came about and how you feel like that has contributed to your interactions with food and movement.
So we talk about poop here, but also I I always feel like I have to warn people that this story, I've sometimes told this story to men and they don't know how to react. And it's like, you don't have to worry. I'm just
They'll
going
get
to
over
tell you
it.
a story. But basically, you know, my mom's sister had a stroke when she was in her 40s, in her mid 40s.
Oh, wow.
And in that process, we discovered that my aunt, my mom, and I really shouldn't be on hormonal birth control. And ever since I was a kid who basically started getting my period, I would get it every 2 weeks. And I know that talking about periods freaks people out almost as much as talking about poop, but for women, it is considered a vital sign. Like our period, when it is not regulated or something is up, it's for me, I have learned my body is really trying to communicate with me that something is wrong. And in the eating disorder space, I think, you know, like when someone loses their period, that's huge. It's a huge red flag because it's so much of our body is in tune with that. So I used to get my period every 2 weeks. I would frequently say, this is a full period. This is not breakthrough bleeding. And they would put me on a birth control and we would try it. And they would tell me it was breakthrough bleeding. And I'd be like, it's not, that's not what this is. And I always laugh because sometimes I think that like gynecology is a lot of people being like, oh, have you considered that you're insane? I hear you sharing symptoms with me, but have you considered that you don't know anything and that you're wrong? And I now believe that I'm an expert at my own experience. I come off hormonal birth control. I get put on an IUD. IUD comes out 5 years later. And when it came out, I was in excruciating pain, way more than normal. And they sent me for an emergency ultrasound. And I discovered that in the middle of the ultrasound, the tech was like, wow, I've only ever seen this in a textbook. Did you know you have 2 uteruses? And I had no idea that everything split in half, split off, and I had 2 completely separate uteruses, which would explain why they couldn't sync. And I would get a period from one, and then 2 weeks later, a period from the other, because an egg would drop, and this one wouldn't get the egg. This one would, it wouldn't be fertilized, that would drop. A couple weeks go by, this one drops. So it's like, and in that process, I started to feel really, really unheard by my doctors because I should have never had this IUD. It was in wrongs for 5 years. And I felt that nobody was listening to me. After some time, I found a functional medicine doctor named Dr. Lauren Davis, who is a gem. And she's not really doing as much in terms of functional medicine anymore. She's doing a lot of work with new moms and breastfeeding. So if you know someone out there who needs some support with that, she's amazing. But she's like a real doctor, but her training is super holistic. And when I met with her, she looked at my labs, asked me some questions, and was basically like, you have irregular periods, your testosterone is almost 3 times what it should be for a woman. Like, you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, and you have ovarian cysts. You have the trifecta. So with her, we started to talk through some other stomach issues that I was having, and she put me on a short-term diet, which I then turned into a lifelong diet, which was not how it was designed. It was a short-term diet. And I decided that it was going to be the thing that cured my PCOS. Because if you go on the internet and you talk to people, especially on Instagram, Reddit, or TikTok, which often I'll be like, hold on, I have to consult my doctor, and I'll go on Reddit. I'm just kidding. I know that that's not accurate. But people will be like, I stopped eating sugar and, now I can have kids. I stopped eating gluten. Now I can have kids. I stopped eating. So I started to, again, have this like build your own adventure with a very restrictive diet. And when I went and met with Carly, the dietitian, she basically had me write out all of my rules for what I do eat and all my rules for what I don't eat. And when we looked at what I don't eat based on what I thought was going to heal my PCOS, I mean, I have been afraid of corn for like 3.5 years, like afraid of it, because one doctor one time said something very alarming on the internet. So we finally were able to see that, like, this doesn't even make sense anymore. And she said two things to me. The first was that she asked me if I was easily influenced, and I was like, no. And then she asked me a couple questions about why I wrote the things I did. And I was like, well, I saw a TikTok. Well, the girl on the reels. I don't know if you've been on Reddit lately. You know, it was like so embarrassing. And then the other thing that she shared with me was basically because I was so restrictive, I was putting my body in a position where my PCOS was actually like not going to be better because of how I was and wasn't eating. And that I really needed to have a full, well-rounded diet. So again, so much of this restriction was born out of trying to heal an autoimmune disorder, which then probably flared it up even more and put me in a place where I was like, I am willing to take the advice of this professional who I believe understands PCOS, which I know that she does, and has a real, true working knowledge of food and the human body. And I know that because she would draw pictures for me of what happens when I break down a whole grain in my body. And it was very relieving for me to at least be able to say, I believe that I can trust this person, just like I believed I could trust Dr. Davis, even though I've had some practitioners off and on through my life who I didn't feel listened to me. Here I felt like someone was listening.
And as you were describing that, I kind of thought of my own personal experience and, just a theme that I talk a lot about at work, which is, like control. When we worked through the steps, like my own personal steps and like character defects and things like that, like control was the overarching theme, which, yes, I am a control freak, but I think a lot of people are, like, if you're a human being, you like control in some way. So the way that we decided that I would work on that was, doing intuitive eating, like letting go of the control of like needing to track every single thing I do and just like having faith and buying into something. And
not even that, just to interrupt, really what you were agreeing to was just giving like an 8-week intuitive eating group a shot. So not even necessarily like buying into intuitive eating, but just being receptive to something different.
Yeah. I would say I wanted the group to work. So I was like buying into this philosophy for the group. And then, obviously it led me here. But as you were kind of talking about, it sounds like you received this diagnosis that's completely out of your control. It's really overwhelming. You get to a point where you're frustrated. You're not in control of, the doctors and these practitioners who you feel like aren't listening to you. And then you receive this diagnosis in a very abrupt way. And I just, I would picture how I would respond to that. And it is like really overwhelming. And the way that I have coped with that in the past is like grasping for straws, anything that I can control to try to, recover or find a solution to fix this. And it sounds like you did that, but it's like you overdid it. And it is unfortunate where we don't have as much guidance, like it's like, here's this diagnosis, good luck. And now.
And what I found was, as someone who doesn't want children, it was kind of like, yeah, you have this diagnosis, but you didn't want kids anyway, so you're good.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, it's kind of alarming. Like, it means that things are out of whack with my body.
Yeah.
And a ruptured ovarian cyst is a horrible, horrible experience.
Yeah.
That gets worse with stress for me. So I think what I found in all of that was like, some of these issues, like, it doesn't really matter if I'm having kids or not. I want to be healthy and I want to be heard. So, for both of us, I think it's like that control is just, it's like at the core of it is fear. Like, I am so afraid of what might happen. And the one thing that you and I have talked about, I keep saying like the one thing, but you and I have talked about 700,000 things. So I should maybe ditch that phrase. But you and I talked about these fears that we discover in the 12-step process that feel so shameful.
Yeah.
And then when we talk about them with other people, we find that almost everyone has the same fears. So like my fears in my fear inventory are like fear of not being good enough, fear of abandonment, fear of if you knew who I really was, you would hate me as much as I do. And like that one comes and goes. I don't think I'm filled with self-loathing now, but I am so afraid of rejection and what other people think of me. And then on the flip side, I'm afraid of letting what other people think of me dictate my entire life. So again, that's where the 12 steps have been so helpful in at least putting me in the position that I'm willing to be vulnerable with other people. It serves me better to be, there's this talk of higher powers and stuff. And like what I've found is that my higher power is basically like, if I live in a certain way, I feel connected to other people. If I live in the opposite way, I feel disconnected. So when I am vulnerable and authentic with other people, I get to feel connected with you. And when I get to feel connected with you, it feels like the challenges that you've had in your life and the really heavy stuff that you've survived connect you to me and vice versa. And maybe they weren't for nothing because we get to have this connection as a result of being vulnerable with all that. So that's the end of that little
I love that.
pitch.
So, obviously, I don't want to say obviously, it sounds like you're still recovering, and, I feel like we really all are, and this is, an ever-changing journey. But what do you feel like so far has been the most beneficial for you to start healing your relationship with food and your body?
Honestly, I think it's been being receptive to other people's experiences. What I said before, where although they might be different, there are threads of really similar experiences amongst us. I don't struggle with bulimia, and I don't struggle with anorexia, but I do have some really shared experiences with body dysmorphia. And if I can hear your experience and perhaps what you've done to change that, then like I can start to be a little less delusional about my own experience.
Yeah, and I think like I talked about earlier, community is so important, and I feel like this internal dialogue that we have, which really can be self-destructing, and it can really be really isolating. And you mentioned, it's so shameful, and kind of like the whole like quote unquote, am I crazy? Like no one else can experience what I experienced. But my experience has been when I am vulnerable, like you said, and I talk about this with people I love out loud who can relate to me. Obviously, I just want to say maybe not being vulnerable with people who you feel like will not understand.
Yeah, or with just like strangers.
Yeah, so you just want to like, take care of yourself. But when I talk to like you or Ryan or Sarah, and I know like we were just talking about body dysmorphia the other day, and I think how we approach our delusions is with humor, where it's like, Saltwater posted a video and my face wasn't in it of me working out, and I was like, who is that? Like, I know I'm tagged in this reel,
Yeah,
but
you
who
were
is
like,
it?
I'm not in this video.
And I think that's like, wow, like and then this is also helpful too when I'm having a bad like body image day, or when I talk to kids, especially at work, like teenagers who are like, well, I'm fat, or I feel this way, or when I look at myself and I'm like, sweetie, we have body dysmorphia. Like our perspective or perception of what we look like is not real. And I think that kind of clicks for a lot of people because yes, it feels so real, but truly body dysmorphia, we have no idea what we really look like.
Right.
So anyway, all that to say, like when I talk with people about this, one, it helps externalize and say, okay, yes, I understand how irrational this may seem once I say it out loud, and how I can like separate myself from it. And two, I'm not alone in this. There's people who also experience similar things to me.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I have been very cognizant of that I just want to kind of chime in and add is that I've started to make a really concerted effort not to talk about myself in a way that I would never allow someone else to talk about me. And that's really, really hard for me. But especially at the gym, it's taken me a long time to realize that there are some people who genuinely admire me as a person that they know at the gym, who works out, who sets an
Yeah,
example of
coach.
fitness. So when that person gives me a compliment and says, wow, that lift was really amazing. Wow, you did great in that workout. If my response is like, I mean, you, especially as someone who at times has lifted like literally 3 times the weight that I was lifting, like if I were to tell you, Rachel, that lift was amazing, and you were like, I'm a fat piece of shit, that lift sucked, it makes me like, oh, well, if Rachel thinks that 185 pounds is nothing, then like me moving this 55-pound barbell, how
Yeah.
lame am I? So I really try to be aware that there are people at all times who are watching us, not because they, and not to make you insecure or me insecure, but it's like people do
Yeah.
admire us, and that is so amazing, and we forget that because we are so tough on ourselves. And I've really tried to practice like just being receptive to the feedback that someone gives me. When someone tells me I'm really strong, I say thank you, I worked really hard, and not dismissing that it's taken me 8 years to do some of the stuff that I can
Yeah.
do fitness wise today.
Yeah. That's what you deserve. So, what advice, if someone is new in this journey of trying to heal their relationship with food or movement or their body, what advice would you give someone? Like, where should they start? What would you suggest?
I mean, I would, for me, based on my experience, I would say talk to a professional. Find someone, and I know that on the internet, kind of anyone can say that they're a professional, but find someone who maybe has that eating disorder certification. Maybe find a nutritionist with the understanding that mental health providers are like shoes. They don't all fit the same. They don't all do the same thing. That's okay. What
Good
I often
advice.
tell people who are seeking therapy, because a lot of the conversations that I have with people, they're investigating maybe a couple options, is like if you don't feel that you connect with your therapist after a few sessions, if you don't feel that you connected in a group setting after a few sessions, that's okay. You don't have to force something. There are other options for you. So if you meet with a therapist to talk about your eating disorder and you find that they keep telling you to eat a sandwich and that that's not helpful language for you,
Yeah.
it's okay to look around and find another one. I think, we spend a lot of time getting ourselves maybe, I don't know if sick is the right word, but like when I look at my substance use, right, like it took me years and years and years and years to hit a bottom. And then I'm
Yeah.
expected to get well really fast. And that
Yeah.
is crazy. And the same thing goes with food. And for a lot of us, our disordered relationship with food and our body has been going on for longer than substance use or longer than a gambling addiction. Like some of that stuff it's gonna take time. And I think that that's why people often, like I see myself as in a journey right now to heal some of this stuff with myself. And even when you asked me to be on the podcast, I was like, I don't know that I'm well enough in this arena to be on the podcast, but it's a journey.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important because I also see and hear a lot of people who get like so discouraged and then, you know, they had like one negative experience and it's like, I'm never doing that again. And it's like, okay, well, the odds are of that happening several times, hopefully not. I mean, I think it's important how you're searching things, who you're getting referrals from, but there are options. Yeah, I think you have to be your own advocate to a certain extent of like what is working for you and knowing that there are options out there and that this is going to be a process.
Absolutely. And I would say that if anybody's listening to this and you're like, well, I need a resource and I need help, you can ask Rachel and I. We'll ask some
Yeah.
questions and
Yeah.
then appropriately help you.
No, and I always tell my clients, like, hey, let's give this 3 sessions. If you feel like this isn't a good fit, please do not ghost me. Please, if you can't do this in person, text me and tell me that you would like a referral. And there's several people that I can refer you to depending on what you're looking for, because I really like to give them that autonomy of choice. But even if anybody needs any type of reference that's not me, I'm happy to help.
Yeah. It's like, the joke that I make often when I talk to people is like, from working in the mental health space, I know who does what they say they do, and I also know who doesn't. So I can offer you like a little bit of guidance, and then you as the individual can make a decision about what's best for you.
Yes, yes. Well, I think that about wraps it up. And thank you so much, Alyssa, for coming on. It was great to, I guess, record our conversations that we actually have anyway.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think this is a great platform and important for people to have the opportunity to hear about these things, also have someone to relate to. So I just really appreciate you, and I'm grateful that you came on to do this with me.
Of course. And just so that everyone knows, I am the officiant of Rachel and Ryan's wedding, which is
Yay.
literally what, 10 days next week?
Yeah.
9, 10 days. So
Yeah,
I just wanted you to be aware that I am a very important person.
you are in our life and in
I'm
general.
kidding, Rich.
uh, well, thank you everybody for tuning in and listening or watching. And keep an eye out for episode 7, which will release the 1st of July. 1st of every month, you'll get a new podcast. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.